Hey guys, today I'm going to explain our notes for World War One. That's what this WWI stands for, World War One, and how it affected Minnesota. If you want to look in our textbook, we are in chapter 14. You guys have the note sheet. You can download that from Schoology, and then on that note sheet, you need to write down the words that are in red. Okay, and then on that note sheet, you put that notability, either handwrite or type in the notes in red, and you'll be turning that in for a grade. Okay, so as we go through, we will read all notes carefully and even look at the pictures, and I'll make sure to explain them. And as I'm going, if you need to pause me to write and then come back, that is totally okay. So let's get started. And then, like I said, when you are done, make sure you upload to Schoology. So early 1900s. So let's think about where we have been at. So in the early 1900s, many countries wanted to be the most powerful country in Europe. So if you were, and they thought if you were the most powerful country in Europe, that you could control the whole world. So think about, what did we learn about before we had all of this happen when we were in school? We were talking about factories, right? Building resources. And so that's going on. So many European countries, they gathered resources, right? They had factories, they built them, they got them from other countries. They built empires by controlling other places around the world. So European countries would go to other countries around the world, like in Africa and Latin America, and then take over those countries to have more power. And then they also built alliances. So alliance is a really important word that we'll be talking about throughout when we talk about World War I and even in the future. So an alliance, that is an agreement that you make with another country. So if I give you an example, if the United States made an alliance with Canada, you both you're like making a deal to help each other out. So if one country goes into war, the other country goes there to help you. So there was alliances. If the United States went to war, Canada would have to go and help them in my example, right? So different European countries, they built these alliances with their neighbor countries, the ones that were next to them, to try to become more powerful, to have more people helping them and supporting them. So this is what you need to write down. Number one, if you were in an alliance with another country, you had to fight in a war with them. And this caused a big problem in 1914 when more than 32 countries fought in World War I after just a minor incident. Okay, let's say that again. Number one, if you were in an alliance with another country, you had to fight with them in the war. And this caused a problem in 1914 when more than 32 countries fought in World War I after a minor incident. Okay, so write that down. Like I said earlier, if you need to pause to finish writing that down, no big deal. I'm going to go on and talk about these pictures. So our top picture up here is some men fighting. This little hole in the ground that you see that they're in, that's something we call trenches that they did use to fight in World War I. We'll talk about that more later. Here are two soldiers walking through a town that's been destroyed, and then just more fighting. Okay, let's move on. So the war begins. So let's talk about the different sides. So in 1914, an assassin killed an important American person, and the countries felt tension from this happening, and then they responded by joining with their alliances to fight their enemies. Okay, so how it started. An assassin killed an important leader in Europe, and the different countries went to their allies and they formed kind of two sides. So this was called the Great War, and it was fought from 1914 to 1918. So Great War is a nickname for World War I. Okay, so the two sides that were formed were the Allies and the Central Powers. You should have read about that in our vocab. And so when the United States eventually joined the war, they joined on the side of the Allies. So they were with Britain, France, and Russia. So right here is Great Britain, these two little islands. France is right here, and looks like a star. And then Russia is the really big green country right here. Okay, So America's response, number 2. At first, many Americans wanted to stay out of the war. But after Germany attacked American ships, we joined the Allies. Okay, let me say that again. Number 2, at first, many Americans wanted to stay out of the war. But after Germany attacked American ships, the United States joined the sides of the Allies. Okay? So, the war was first happening just in Europe over here. And Americans felt like it was not their problem. But when Germany, that's this pinkish one right here, they attacked an American ship, and then the United States joined the war. Many Minnesotans felt a lot of American pride or patriotism. Remember, that's one of our vocab words. And they wanted to support the war by either fighting in the military, either giving money to the government in form of war bonds. War bonds is another one of our vocab words. Remember, that is when you paid money to the government for the bond, and then the government, when the war was done, gave you that money back plus the interest on it. Okay? So people supported the war by joining the military, giving money, or saving supplies like metals and food. Okay? Let's go on to our next slide. So, proving our loyalty. So, the government made different policies. Policies are like laws. And so, when the war started, Minnesota's government created the Commission of Public Safety, or CPS. This is another one of our vocab words from the other day. So, number 3, the CPS was in charge of making sure Minnesotans were being loyal to the United States and monitored immigrants who were connected to Europe. Let me say it again. Number 3, the CPS was in charge of making sure Minnesotans were being loyal to the United States and monitored immigrants who were connected to Europe. So let's break this down a little bit. So CPS, remember that is our Commission of Public Safety, CPS. So the CPS was in charge of making laws that helped the war. So they were then in charge of making sure that Minnesotans were being loyal, right? That they were supporting the United States and supporting the war effort. They were trying to help win the war, okay? So they actively monitor immigrants. So remember, immigrants are people who move from one country into another country. So they were monitoring immigrants who came from Europe. When we think about Minnesota's history and what we've learned about so far, most people who immigrated into Minnesota were from Europe. So they were monitoring many immigrants and making sure that they were fighting for on the American side and not on the other side, like with the Germans. Okay, so this created a lot of tension, right? Tension is like fighting, people getting mad at each other. So tension in Minnesota communities. The CPS investigated many German Minnesotans and believed that they were un-American because they did not want to fight against their old country. A lot of our immigrants in Minnesota from this time were actually from Germany. And so as the CPS was supposed to make sure that everyone in Minnesota was fighting and helping the Americans, but some of those immigrants did not want to fight against their old countries. Maybe they had family there, right? Just think about what kind of situation if you were in that situation, how would you feel? So a lot of German Minnesotans were questioned. Some lost their jobs or were even accused of being traitors. So all because some people didn't want to fight in the war. They were questioned, they lost their jobs, and they were accused of being traitors. Okay? So when we talk about their patriotism, remember that's your pride for your country. So like on 4th of July, we are patriotic. We celebrate the day that America was made into a country, right? We wear red, white, and blue. There's fireworks. We do things that represent America, and we celebrate it. So some farmers and workers who supported the war effort questioned some things that the government was doing. So even people who supported the war and were helping the United States government, they did not like everything that the government was doing, and the CPS threatened those people and labeled them as traitors. And near the end of the war, most Minnesotans hated the CPS, and the group was eventually forced to shut down. Okay, so now we're going to look at our propaganda and patriotism. Remember, both of those words are vocab words that we had. So remember, propaganda is when the use of posters and movies and music and different things to try to get people to support your idea. Kind of think of it as like a commercial or other advertisements you might see. They're trying to get you to buy their products. Propaganda is trying to get you to support their ideas. And patriotism, remember, support of your country. Propaganda, patriotism. So number 4, I'll give you a second to read that. Okay, number 4. The U.S. government used propaganda to persuade Americans to support the war effort. Typically, propaganda shows one viewpoint and may lie or even exaggerate to get their point across. Okay, let me say it again. The U.S. government used propaganda to persuade Americans to support the war effort. They were trying to, the propaganda was trying to make everyone support the war, to fight, to help pay for it, to give up supplies, right? They were trying to get everyone on board to fight the war. And so propaganda shows one viewpoint, the view that everyone needs to support the war, and may lie or exaggerate to get points across. So they may lie and call the other side of, like, the Central Powers bad names, right? They might say they're evil people, they're doing all these terrible things, right? They're lying, they're not telling the truth to try to get you to support the Americans, right? That's what they're trying to do, and they're going to do whatever they can to make you do it. So most propaganda asked Americans to do something patriotic, try to do something to help the United States, like become a soldier, buy war bonds to support the fight, or save and donate food and materials. So look at these pictures. What do you see? What do you notice? What do you think they're trying to get you to do? I'll give you a second to look at them and figure that out. What are they trying to get you to do or think? Okay, let's look at this first one. So this first one says, destroy this bad brute, right? Enlist. A brute, it's not a positive term. It's like calling someone an ape, right? And so who do you think they are calling a brute? I'm gonna say they're calling the Germans brutes, and they say we need to destroy them, right? You need to enlist, which means join the army to destroy them, right? Now let's look at this one. It says, will you fight now or wait for this, right? If you don't join to fight us now, this is what's going to happen. We're going to destroy your town. People are going to die. Looks like that person might be dead, right? We're going to set fire to your town. If you don't join the fight, this is what's going to happen, right? They're trying to get you to join the army. Third one, if you can't enlist, invest. Buy a Liberty bond. Defend your country with your dollars. Okay? So maybe you can't join the army. Maybe you're a woman. Maybe you're too young. Maybe you have health issues. Whatever your case might be, if you can't enlist and fight in the army, you can invest your money. You can pay for the war, right? They needed to buy guns, ammo, right? There's lots of expenses. And if you could buy a war bond, you would defend your country with your dollars, right? What are they trying to get you to do? Buy a Liberty bond, okay? Last one, we are saving you, save food. Well-fed soldiers will win the war, okay? So it's kind of using some guilt, right? Like, hey, we're fighting for you. That's what this guy kind of is saying, right? The soldier. So you need to save us some food, right? The soldiers needed food, so they're trying to get Americans to save food, not use as much food, not use as much materials, because those could be donated to fight and help with the war, okay? See, all of these are propaganda posters. They're trying to get you to do something, right? Right? And you notice what they're trying to say. You look at the pictures, okay? So let's move on. So now we're going to look at what Minnesota did to help the war. So Minnesota's contribution. Contribution is how they helped. So many Minnesotan men actually did fight in the war. And the war was fought in dugout trenches. So a trench is literally when they dig like a hole in the ground and use the sides to kind of like hide and protect themselves. And so the war was fought in dugout trenches where men were shot at, bombed, and they threw poisonous gas at one another. Okay? So if you see this picture right here, you can see kind of looks like a gas mask. Well, they're using that because they each side threw gas bombs at each other, and it would cause blindness, right? Cause a lot of bad things to happen. So they wore these masks to help protect themselves. So number 5, this is what you need to write down. Most Minnesota women stayed back and worked in factories. They saved money and materials, and they raised the children. Some women actually did go to Europe to support the war by joining the Red Cross as nurses. Okay, so what did the women do? They had to, most of them stayed back, so they worked in factories. Remember, again, this is a time when most people had their jobs in factories. So when the men who had those jobs went off to war, those jobs needed to get filled. And so women came to work. They worked in factories that built different supplies to the war, like the different things they needed. They saved their money and materials, so that money and those materials were shipped over to the soldiers to help them. And then they also raised the children that were left behind inside their country, inside the United States. But there were some women that did go off to Europe and supported the war by joining the Red Cross as nurses. So here you can see some Red Cross nurses. Like I said, this is our trench. You can see them fighting. Looks like they're getting their ankles taped, the gas mask, and then another trench. Okay. So when the war ended, so the World War I, remember WWI's World War I, was the biggest and bloodiest war in human history, and it was named the Great War. And it changed the way many countries looked and acted. And America had been a nation of immigrants, but after the war, many Americans felt less like a bunch of just random immigrants with differences and more American. So let's explain this idea again. So America had just been a nation of lots of different people from different places. But the war brought people together. It brought Americans together and kind of gave them the term American. Like, we're all Americans. It doesn't matter where you're from. We're all Americans. Okay? So number 6, I need to write this down. Over 3,500 Minnesotans died in the war, and many Americans thought if the Central Powers were defeated, no more wars would ever happen. Let's do that one more time. Number 6, over 3,500 Minnesotans died in the war, and many Americans thought if the Central Powers were defeated, that no more wars would happen. So let's look at the pictures. Great War Ends is the headline of this newspaper from Chicago. Here's a picture of many people holding newspapers. So this one says Germany surrenders. This one says the war is over. Germany surrendered. Okay. And here are American soldiers holding up their flag. American soldiers holding up the flag celebrating that the war is over. Okay, so you need to have all 6 of these red sentences on your note sheet, and next you need to answer these questions, okay? So I will read them to you and help explain them. You do not need to write down these blue questions. You need to write down your answers to them, okay? So number 1, do you think World War I should have happened after a minor incident? Remember that minor incident was that American leader was killed. Do you think that should have caused this whole world war to happen? Why or why not? So here's how you need to answer this. I think that the war should have happened, or the war should not have happened because, right? Do you think it was okay for a person to get killed? But should that have caused a whole world war to happen? There's no right or wrong. You just need to answer the question. Okay, now question number 2. Do you think that the CPS, the Commission of Public Safety, was a good idea? Should the government be able to check how patriotic or American people are? So do you think the CPS was a good idea? Remember, the CPS was the group that made laws that forced people to help the war, right? So do you think CPS was a good idea? I think CPS was a good idea, or I think CPS was a bad idea, right? Answer the question. And then, should the government be able to check how patriotic or American people are? I think the government should be able to check on Americans and see how patriotic they are, or I think the government should not be able to, right? You have 2 questions. You need to answer both of them. Okay? Now our last one, question 3. Can you think of anything that reminds you of propaganda in America today? What kind of things? So what are some examples of propaganda that we have today? So I shared that propaganda is kind of like advertisements, right? We see commercials, billboards, we get ads on our phones, like on Instagram, on YouTube, right? So what does it remind you of? So propaganda reminds me of blank. Okay, so tell me what they are. Okay, so after you're done answering these 3 questions and you have all 6 notes written in, you need to upload the document back into Schoology and to get this turned in. Okay, if you have any questions or need any extra help with the questions or anything else, you can email me or Mr. Jimmy. Okay, good luck, guys.